Welcome to Radical Feminist Perspectives. We're back after the long holiday, and we had a thing last week, but we're starting now. We're here now. We are going to be talking about the book Beyond God the Father by Mary Daly, and it's yeah, brilliant. It's towards a philosophy of women's liberation, and the discussants are me, Joe Brew, and I'm just going to stop the share so you can see Marian and Marian Rutigliano. So, uh, Marian, what made you like this book? Why do you think it's a good thing for us to be doing it?
Well, because she starts really from the foundation of radical feminism. She has an original reintroduction. It was on a reprint where where she says that there are attempts to undermine our power of presence, spiritual presence, and she says this takes the form of covering over all evidence of our own reality so that women come to disbelieve in our own powers. This assault against our ability to realize our own presence comes from the media, education, all of the progression professions, degraded caricatures of women from hardcore porn images to mindlessly adoring wives of politicians, instill self-loathing, women hatred, and terror. So, I mean, she starts by saying what we know is that women's reactions to what is done to them is not because there's something wrong with women. It's because there's something wrong with what's being done to them. And we see that, and it's like a way of, when people say it's like, oh, she must have wanted to be raped. Oh, she must have wanted this. She must have wanted this. She starts out by saying how women respond to all these patriarchal religions for thousands of millennia is not because there's something wrong with women. It's because of the patriarchal religions for thousands of millennia.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to share the contents. So this book was written in 1973, and then the reintroduction was done in was it 85?
Yeah.
So Marian's just sort of referred to that, but I'll just go through the contents page so you know what's in the book. So there's a reintroduction, 1985. So it's sort of saying what's changed, what she still believes, what she doesn't believe. There's a preface, problem, purpose, and method. So she explains the problem that she's going to deal with, the purpose and the method. And then after the death of God the Father, um, and I'll just say at this moment that the way that she's talking, she talks in the book, is based on she had three PhDs, but possibly not by then. She might have only had one or two PhDs at this stage. But she had been trained in theology, and she really wanted to do philosophy, but she couldn't get a post doing that. She couldn't get funded, so she did theology, and and she was very involved. She knew a lot about theology, but also the crossover into philosophy. And so she's saying after the death of God the Father, God is dead, all of that. She refers to a lot of the theologians and ex-theologians and philosophers and what they're trying to do. Most of the men, of course, were trying to just change from the Christian God to a new form of possibly secular God is dead, long live the father, the patriarchy. But she talks through this radical feminist perspective. Then exorcising evil from Eve, the fall into freedom, beyond crystal Christolatry, a world without models. Oh, Christolatry. So it's about Christ being the model. Transvaluation of values, the end of phallic morality, the bonds of freedom, sisterhood as anti-church, then sisterhood as cosmic covenant, and the final cause, the cause of causes. So, and then there's a lovely little illustration by this Emily Oddwoman who illustrates and went on to illustrate quite a lot of Mary Daly's other works, and it is very nice. And you'll see more of those illustrations in her other books. This is the only one in this book. Um, yeah. So, Marian, have you got anything you want to say about the contents?
Um,
or anything else.
no, I mean, you can say that she's very bitter, but I think she thinks that there could be something really good and positive about spiritually. She talks really early on in that reintroduction about, the sense of depression, repression that is patriarchy mutes the awakening of other senses. So she thinks there's something better.
Yeah,
That's a positive.
yeah, definitely. Yeah. So, right. So the first bit I wanted to point out about is this in the reintroduction, which was, let's say, 1985. So it was 12 years after the first publication of Beyond God the Father. She says this: reintroducing Beyond God the Father, however, is a profoundly different experience. She's referring to that she did not agree with what she wrote in The Church and the Second Sex. So she said that was her first book, which was about 1969 or something. She's actually moved on from that, but that she says this book, Beyond the God the Father, I basically still agree with its major theses, understanding many of them more deeply than I did when I wrote the book. Although I have changed my vocabulary to a great extent, and although my ideas have evolved, I recognize this work as prophetic in many ways, as explained in this original reintroduction. And it's lovely to see that, because the fact that she still agrees with this book Beyond the God the Father by 1985 is nice for us because we can read it with the knowledge that she still thinks it's very correct and basically the ideas are correct. And I must say, having read it again now, I recognized almost everything in her later works, or, just so many of the concepts, which we'll go through in this webinar, that are in her later works that are sort of central, incredibly helpful ideas. And somebody said gynecology is awesome. Lots and lots of the words and phrases and sort of understanding in gynecology is there in Beyond God the Father. And so I sort of thought she might have moved on a lot when she got to gynecology and pure lust, etc. But she actually was already there. And I just before moving on to the next slide, the thing people in the chat are saying start with gynecology, and I totally agree with that. Although we're looking at Beyond God the Father today, the problem with Beyond God the Father is she's referencing all the male theologians and theorists. So almost all her references are men and males. And she quotes from them and says, oh, this insight by Paul Tillich, or this insight by Aquinas, or etc., etc. Nietzsche. They're almost all men. She does reference quite a few women, but she's gone massively further when she gets to gynecology into our space, into our women's understanding. So that's a frustrating thing. Although if you've got lots of time, read it, but otherwise, maybe not. Back to you, Marian.
Um, excuse me, it's allergy season in the US.
Yeah.
She does reference a lot of male theologians, primarily because that's mostly who the theologians are. It's not all necessarily bad. Paul Tillich was he was very, very influential, and I think she used a lot of his stuff in one of her PhDs. He was Lutheran. He was an existentialist. He was also very much a socialist, and was one of the few people talking about like socialism as part of Christianity, as part of religion. He was in Germany. I think he left in the early 30s. And he used the concept of being, which she talks about in this book, being as the power of being, and that God is the ground of all being. Um, that in and of itself is not bad. And she um goes on from there and talks about it in a non-patriarchal setting.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I think Tillich was a good influence on her, and out of a lot of the male theologians she could have chosen, he was probably one that influenced her the most, or made the most sense, or that she was able to take further into a women's theology, basically.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Great. So I'm going to go now into the next slide, the next bit. So we've taken a few of her quotes and sort of going to share them during this webinar. So um, already at that time, 19, is it 71? 72 she wrote, 73. Yeah. Um, people were talking about, or women maybe were talking about going beyond God the Father and going towards a sort of um, goddess. So just replacing God, male God. And this is, she's almost exclusively talking about Christianity in this book. And then she says that that just doesn't work. It's not, it absolutely can't work. And then she says this, thus, the goddess can be reduced to a static symbol, a mere replacement for the noun God. Such a replacement can amount to a change as minimal as a transsexual operation on the patriarchal God. Since, as Jan Raymond has shown, a transexed, supposedly transexed male is still a male, a she-male, or a male to constructed female. It is clear that such an operation, whether men perform it on each other or on their God, cannot be expected to bring about a profound psychic or social change. A transexed patriarchal God is still patriarchal and will function, at least in subliminal or subterranean ways, to serve the interests of the fathers. For such a symbol is external to the experienced reality of women and nature. If we want to discover, she's starting to use this discover, so this breaking up of words, how the goddess, singular or plural, is functioning for women, it will be useful to observe how this affects our being in the world. Insofar as the image inspires passivity, self-absorption, the plastic passion of fulfillment, and in general the therapeutic syndrome of rageless returning, there's an ample indication that it is functioning as a noun. The noun goddess, tokenized derivative of the Christian God, serves the cockocratic establishment, perpetuating the status quo. So this is in the reintroduction bit. So this bit here, she's introducing the book. So this is 1985 that she's talking about it. But she's talk
Um,
sorry, go on.
there's comments about Paul Tillich in the chat, and I agree. And in you can occasionally find interesting, if not um, good stuff in some writings of male theologians, or in any topic you want to refer to. But virtually every single man will have like garbage in his life. I mean, and I just, I, I just look at it as like they are objects. What their writings are objects. I objectify it. That may have something good in it, but it has nothing to do with who they are as human beings necessarily. So, yeah, I know it's true about Paul Tillich. It's probably true about every every um every male theologian who's ever had anything positive to say. And I really like, when she talks about a transexed patrial god. I mean, women will sometimes use a goddess as a replacement for God, but it's still patriarchal. I mean, she says right there, it's a transsexualized God, and it's just shoehorning the least offensive things in patriarchal religion into, sometimes created matriarchal religions.
Yeah, and there's some really interesting bits that she talks about it in this quote that we just had about not having God as a noun, as a thing, but having an idea of God as being and expanding interconnectedness with other humans and the whole everything and not hierarchical. And there's a lot of development of the idea of what we think. something like God or goodness or the point of being alive is, that is absolutely beyond God the Father, beyond Christianity. And um, yeah, so that's very interesting. As goes back to Paul Tillich, I would tend to think it's probably a good idea not to reference any of these men at all, and to use other women's insights. But I really like a lot of what Daly writes, and she said, as she went on in Pure Lust, and I think she explains it in Pure Lust, that she does sometimes reference men, but as a pirate, stealing their ideas, taking back the ideas that have been stolen from us, or just using them, but recognizing there's a lot of problems with with them as people much of the time, and what they didn't say and what they were hiding, and etc. So I think she really stopped using men to a large extent as she developed, I think. Okay, shall I go on to I'll go on to the next bit.
Sure.
Um, right, so here, um, so th this Living on the Boundary, this book announces the moral imperative to live on the boundary of patriarchal institutions. The boundary, the location of new time, new space, new time, is understood primarily in a psychic sense of woman identified integrity, but this is closely associated with the claiming of physical space, stroke time, by and for women. Such space-time is on the boundary of all that has been considered central. It is hardly surprising that patriarchal attitudes towards women's space and time, sorry, have remained unchanged since the writing of this book. What has been shocking to many feminists is the extent to which the bureaucrats have managed to repossess spaces, times that women have succeeded in claiming for ourselves. So that's very relevant today, isn't it? That the bureaucrats have tried to and succeeded in repossessing our spaces and our times. And I mean, this book is very much about words, our words. And she says at one stage, we've had the power of naming taken away from us, which maybe is her who said it, but she's maybe quoting people, other women. But the the definition of words, the power of speaking for ourselves, has been taken away, and then it's so relevant now that we got it for a bit more of it, and now there's been the repossession of it. And I mean, I'll just say about the boundary living. I think this is an incredibly important concept for certainly for me and possibly for many of us, that we are living. We do have to survive. We have to make money and feed ourselves and live. And that often means that we have to work within the patriarchal institutions or situations. Um, but this lovely concept that we're living on the boundary and that we are in a women identified space and we reclaim it for ourselves. And later on in later books, she talks about this idea of meta-patriarchal space, which I just completely, when I heard that, I thought, yeah, that's it. And I must say, I think Radfem Perspectives is meta-patriarchal space. We right now are in a meta-patriarchal space, which is lovely. And it's sort of directly come, in my mind, from these concepts of living on the boundary, using some of the patriarchal stuff, but then taking and making space for ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, patriarchy has always, in every religion, been what has kept or defined the traditions. This religion has these traditions. It's always come from patriarchy. The written canons of any religion, the written developed theology, the description and the definition and the establishing of rituals and laws. I mean, that's all pure patriarchy. So women, what do we create? I mean, do we create our own religions? Do we adapt, I don't know, pagan concepts? Do we create, a matriarchal or woman-centered religious or spiritual tradition? Something new. And if we do, how do we do that? Is it influenced by, individual women or individual or groups of women who create them? And if they do, if we do, does that come from individual personal beliefs? Does it come from personalities? Does it come from values? Does it come from interpreting whatever, scattered text may have been written by women? For women to create our own spirituality, where does that come from? We know where everything comes from in patriarchy. It comes from patriarchy. That's what it is. When we create and we step outside of it, what are we stepping into? Where is it coming from? And 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 sometimes it's good and sometimes it's not so good. And
Well,
sometimes
I mean, I think she answers that
it's not
very
really a
well.
religion.
I think those questions that you're posing, she answers very well in her
Yeah.
writing. So I mean, I was brought up as a Christian. Had to go to church all the time, and it really profoundly influenced my life. So it was incredibly useful of breaking free from Christianity, the reading of Mary Daly. So anybody else who's had to go to church or was told
Yeah.
any of this was true, I'd highly recommend reading all of Mary Daly because it basically gets rid of it all.
Right.
Yeah, and I mean, there are, I would say there are sort of about 10 ways in which she answers those questions.
Yeah. I mean, that was the point. It's like, where does it come from? Well, this is what Mary Daly is talking about.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. So let's go back to the what she says, and then we can find what her answers are. So here we are, share. Right, so here. Now, she's saying sisterhood. She's talking about sisterhood being where it comes from, bonding with other women. And she says that this is a phenomena that's been really happening. This is now the 73 bit. She goes, the bonding of sisterhood is born out of shared recognition that there exists a worldwide phenomenon of sexual caste. Basically the same whether one lives in Saudi Arabia or in Sweden. This planetary sexual caste system involves birth ascribed, hierarchically ordered groups whose members have unequal access to goods, services, and prestige, and to physical and mental well-being. Clearly, I'm not using the term caste in its most rigid sense, which would apply only to Brahminic Indian society. I'm using it in accordance with Berriman's, this is one of these guys she talks about, broad description, since our language at present lacks other terms to describe systems of rigid social stratification analogous to the Indian system. And then just after that, she talks about the way that this women are sort of is hidden from women. She says the fact of women's low caste status has been and is disguised. It is masked, first of all, by sex role segregation. This is more subtle than spatial segregation, as in a ghetto, for it makes possible the delusion that women should be equal but different. Sexual caste is hidden also by the fact that women have various forms of derivative status as a consequence of relationships with men. So, one of the things I found interesting reading this again is that this is very early 1970s, that she's writing this, and she's a very good writer. So, um, it, it, and also she's not befuddled by all of the nonsense that some of the sort of post-feminism or postmodernism or lib fem stuff or academic feminism. She was right there in this sort of explosion of radical feminist understanding, and she's writing very, very clearly and has fantastic insights. So it's definitely worth reading because she's so clear on it. And this Sheila Jeffries in the chat saying, "I prefer the term caste to that of a sex class." Good stuff. I think it is very, very helpful to think of a caste, but we know that they let some women out, don't they, to give the illusion that it's not a caste. So, and it's even more complicated now that men are saying that they're women.
Yeah, reference was made to, we will take things that men say seriously just because they're men, even though they are flawed or more than flawed human beings. And I agree. There are things you can take out of it, but I'm, you know, I'm willing to basically pick out just a few things and then cast them aside other than that, because they're not, I don't think that what they have to say about how women should live our lives and and develop community, spiritual community or any kind of community, they have nothing to say about that. On the other hand, so much of what women say or what we talk about gets lost in the shuffle because women aren't listened to. I mean, you know, sex role cast. Well, there's segregation of sexes in religious worship, in patriarchal religious worship. But on the other hand, I kind of want sex role segregation in religious or spiritual or other kind of communities like that. I want that because what women have to say among ourselves over time, day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year, over a lifetime, I think, and this is what Mary Daly is saying, is a leads to a more leads to not a religion, but something else that women can create that men can never create.
Yeah,
Because it's beyond God the Father.
yeah. Great. Let's go to the next bit. So, then she writes, she carries on, she goes, to a large extent, in recent times, the role of religion in supporting the sexual caste system has been transferred to the professions of psychiatry and psychology. Feminists have pointed out that it is by no accident that Freudian theory emerged as the first wave of feminism was cresting. This was part of the counter-revolution, the male backlash. Psychiatry and psychology have their own creeds, priesthood, spiritual counseling, rules, anathemas. Sorry, I can't say that.
Anathema.
Anathemas, thank you, and jargon. Their power of psychological intimidation is enormous. Millions who might smile at being labelled heretic or sinful for refusing to conform to the norms of sexist society can be cowed and kept in line by the label sick or neurotic or unfeminine. Together, these professions function as mother church of contemporary secular patriarchal religion, and they send missionaries everywhere. It isn't prudent for women to see all of this. Seeing means that everything changes. The old identifications and the old securities are gone. Therefore, the ethic emerging in the women's movement is not an ethic of prudence, but one whose dominant theme is existential courage. This is the courage to see and to be in the face of the nameless anxieties that surface when a woman begins to see through the masks of sexist society and to confront the horrifying fact of her own alienation from her authentic self. So there's a lot in there. I mean, one, she makes the very brilliant point that we don't have so many of us are not religious anymore. Much of society is not religious, so psychiatry and psychology have taken over as a sort of functioning as a religion, and we see that so much now in the gender identity ideology, which everybody, most people are saying functions like a religion, and the priests are the psychiatrists and the psychologists who help them become their true self and fulfill the vision of their gender identity of their soul. So she's seeing this early 70s very clearly. She speaks about it really well. And again, it's wonderful to have that clarity from a radical feminist very early on, and you sort of think, wow, if she could see that so clearly, what else could she see? And then you want to read all the rest of her stuff. And then saying it's not prudent to see it. And then I suppose I mean, these themes that come up in the rest of her writing about the courage to be, the courage to see and the courage um, to be real, to be the women that we really can be and should be, instead of the masks of sexist society, and be an alienated self, like be this constructed feminine that patriarchy wants us to be, sort of to kill the rad femme inside ourselves and just be this thing that they want us to be, but we want to be our authentic self, and that's really nice to see very early on in this writing.
She also talks about, um, uh, hoping, hope, and are we hoping for a communal kind of society? Preferring interrelationships with other, she says, with other finite beings, other women, versus an individualistic hope, which is on a one-to-one basis. And she seems to think that this communal hope is more positive and is what we are striving for. Although she doesn't dismiss the one-to-one basis. Somebody made reference to this being a sort of a Western viewpoint. And it's true. I don't know much about Eastern religions. I just don't. But I know that enough to know, and I know women who've been involved with Hinduism and Buddhism and other Eastern type religions, non-Western religions, and certainly in Islam, who find that it's just as patriarchal, sometimes much, much more deeply so, and much more viciously so in some cases. But to say communal versus one-to-one is really, really important, you
Yeah.
know.
And I think I mean, she says that we are sort of the way to find a good life or to have the meaning of life is to be in community, and particularly in sisterhood, which is not like brotherhood. And she explains that very well. Like, it's not a brotherhood of oppressors, it's a sisterhood of the oppressed fighting back. But it's also it's communion with all beings, and whether they're alive or not. So, and that's, I think, profoundly moving to me. She got through to me more than anything else of our, I think she talks about sort of cosmic uh sisterhood or something, or that we are linked to everything. And that's really lovely. And it's very different from Christianity, where God the Father made Adam, who then said everything else can be used by Adam. And everything else is there just to be used and abused. She says, no, we're not, we're part of this whole thing. And at one moment, there's just one sentence in this Beyond God the Father saying, these insights of the women's movement, which she says don't necessarily just come from her, they come from all of our women's experience, all of us together. It's our own experience that build up to this understanding. She says could be or probably is the only hope for the being like human life on this planet, which, given the ecological nightmare we're living in and the complete lack of interest in solving it by pretty much all the institutions, um, I think she's right there. And she's going right to the heart of it. That the male religions, patriarchal religions, see everything as something to be used by them, and our understanding and living is, we want to be part of it. And yeah.
You made reference to her talking about women being connected to our ancestors. And I don't think it was, occasionally you'll see somebody say, when a female fetus is in its mother's uterus, the female fetus already has all the eggs she will ever have in her lifetime within her. So if you were born from one of those eggs when that your mother carried when she was a fetus, you were somehow within your grandmother. And people think that that's kind of trite, but I'm not sure it is, because I'm not sure we know what the implications for that are, what it means, over generations, physically, psychologically. And yeah, we know, a little bit about passing on traits and heredity and something like that. But it just sort of borders on the spiritual, the connection that women have generation after generation after generation.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, there's also something. I mean, I really value our this WDI stuff we do on webinars, because I feel like Mary Daly, I never met her and never went to a speech by her, but so many of our sisters here in the chat and in our community, and women I'm lucky enough to talk to, did meet her, and I feel like there's a sort of passing on of the baton of from sister to sister, and that we're continuing, luckily, with this new technology. So I think that's another thing of that we are really connected, and that being connected is incredibly healthy and a good thing. Right, I'm going
Yeah.
to move on to the
Well, the
next.
other thing is
Yeah,
the
go on.
point about the difference between brotherhood and sisterhood. You look at the difference between a strictly male military or whatever. I read a book once by somebody who had coached, both boys teams and girls teams and men's teams and women's teams. And for boys, the way you inspire them is by saying, if you do this and win this race, then that makes you worthy. You the man. With girls, that didn't work. The way to inspire them was to say, you are one of us. You are part of us. You are in this, you are in this sisterhood. And we know that whatever you do will be wonderful because you're trying your best because you're one of us. Very, very different. And that plays out very, very differently too in religious communities.
Um, right, I've put up another slide and I'm going to just skip it because it just basically repeats what we've already said. So I'm going to move to the next one. So this is some of the answers. The method of liberation then involves a castrating of language and images that reflect and perpetuate the structures of a sexist world. It castrates precisely in the sense of cutting away the phallocentric value system imposed by patriarchy in its subtle as well as its more manifest expressions. As aliens in a man's world who are now rising up to name, that is, to create our own world, women are beginning to recognize the values that the value system has been thrust upon us by the various cultural institutions of patriarchy, has amounted to a kind of gang rape of minds as well as bodies. And then the castrating God. I have already suggested that if God is male, then male is God. The divine patriarch castrates women as long as he is allowed to live on in the human imagination. The process of cutting away the supreme phallus can hardly be merely a collective rational affair. The problem is one of transforming the collective imagination so that this distortion of the human aspiration to transcendence loses its credibility. Um, I think so. She's saying, as the women's movement, we work together to create a new reality, which is fantastic. And we want to sort of cut away this uh, God the Father, which is great. And if we by doing it together, we are more successful. Right. Let's just keep on. There's another quote from her because they're so good. We just keep going on it. So the next one. So I see this ontological basis of hope, so the being of the hope, to be particularly available to women at this point in history because of the marginal situation of females in an androcentric world. This hope is communal, as you referred to, Marian, rather than merely individualistic, because it is grounded in the two-edged courage to be. That is, it is hope coming from the experience of individuation and participation. It drives beyond the objectified God that is imagined as limited in benevolence, bestowing blessings upon his favourites. The power of being is that in which all finite beings participate, not on a one-to-one basis, since this power is in all while transcending all. Is in all, sorry, while transcending all. Communal hope involves in some manner a profound interrelationship with other finite beings, human and non-human. Ontological communal hope then is cosmic. Its essential dynamic is directed to the universal community. Finally, ontological hope is revolutionary, since the insight in which it's grounded is the double-edged intuition of non-being and being, and it extends beyond the superstitious fixations of technical reason. And then she says a bit little later on related to this, rather than looking at the old models. She says, it seems to me far more important to listen to women's experiences, to discover the spiritual dynamics of this revolution and speak these dynamics in our own words and lives. So, whilst she, of course, is writing, she is, and is very good at writing, um, she is great at about saying it's our lived experiences and our community's lived experiences that we should be basing our going forward and our understanding on.
Yeah, I mean, what we were talking about before is if women are creating something else, what are we creating and what is it, you know, what is it based on? How is it influenced? And that's what she's talking about, beliefs, personalities, values, interpretation of whatever we come up with. But it's 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 not just those those given those things as just like a set of rules. It's much, much more than that. I mean, things that, women who have gone to the Michigan Festival for, forever, talk about something, a sense of community that they found nowhere else. Women who go to any kind of women's communal festival or activity, find something there that they find nowhere else, which is actually destroyed if they also let in the, men who claim they're women. But this is what she's talking about. And if you want to know the root of where women's incredible communal experiences come from, this is what she's talking about, the passage you just read especially.
Yeah, yeah, it's really good. And I think the link with nature, it definitely really helped me saying that we're communing with all beings, finite and non-finite. And a thing I've noticed is when it rains, I'm living in London or on the outskirts of London. When it rains, I really love it because I feel very strongly connected to particularly trees. And like Mary Daly's insight saying what happens to women happens to trees, which she has in, I think, in gynecology or maybe pure lust. They cut us down and truncate us and etc. And dress us up like Christmas trees. But um, I think I wouldn't have had that insight. I wouldn't have had that feeling. Like when it rains, I actually feel joy for the trees, and I feel like it's there at a cocktail party. They're having a load of fun, and and I sort of really look at them and feel like, oh my God, this is brilliant. They're having loads of water, which is what they want, and it's been a drought time for them, and now suddenly it's raining, and it's a massive party. And I think it's a real gift that I feel I've got from Mary Daly's writing that I have had that insight that somehow was blocked by my Christian upbringing, which was we're humans and we're relating in a sort of profound way to God the Father and the books and the that history of which is just patriarchal oppression. And then she broke through all of that and let me be communing with obviously with other sisters. And you're mentioning these women's events, which are absolutely the best thing in terms of us really being ourselves and moving forward and doing what we want to. But then also having that link with nature is amazing.
Yes, more.
Yeah, great. Well, let's do the next bit of it. Um, so here we have Mary Daly saying, sisterhood means revolution. The positive refusal of co-option means, in effect, the becoming of the sisterhood of women, which is necessary to overcome the paralysis, self-hatred extended to women as a caste, self-depreciation, and emotional dependence upon men for a feeling of self-esteem. It would be a mistake to think that this is merely the feminine counterpart of brotherhood, basically the same in meaning but applied to females. Sisterhood is the bonding of those who are oppressed, by definition. Although males are oppressed in classes and groups, have often called each other brother, there is nothing inherent in the term that signals bonding against oppression, since men are not victimized as men. In fact, it is a term for relationships of males to each other, signifying the higher caste in sexually hierarchical society. And so sisterhood is a totally different thing to brotherhood, and it means revolution, which is great.
Um, yeah, I mean, there's even within her own religion, is it's not just Christianity, she was Catholic. Um, there is a difference between the way, and I think she made reference to it in like one or two lines somewhere in there, a difference between the way communities of brothers in different orders works and communities of sisters. And yeah, there's a lot of hierarchy and rules and things like that. But the way the way men express their feeling of brotherhood to each other is different from the way women express their sisterhood. I have friends who went to a Catholic college in the city where I live, and a Catholic women's college, who said the men's college, the men's Catholic college down the road, was very much Catholic, but there was a difference. The women's Catholic college was very much a women's college, much more along the lines of specifically secular women's college in terms of relationships. And even the nuns were more like were closer to what used to be hippie women's college women than they were to Catholics. And they found it just wonderful experiences. I don't know how true that is anywhere, but the fact that that can happen, I think speaks to how sisterhood is really different from brotherhood.
Yeah. Right. Stop share. So let's go on to the next one. So this one, this quote here is, I mean, just to say before reading this, a lot of this book actually picks apart Christianity and um, says just how anti-women it is. And she says at the beginning, I don't need to tell you all the ways in which Christianity is anti-women, but she does actually tell us a lot of them. So it's really, really useful seeing lots of the bad stuff. She also mentions a bit the story of when she was asked to do a sermon in an American church, and she did the sermon, which was basically saying, we need to leave the church. We can't make Christianity, we can't make any bits of Christianity non-patriarchal. We actually just have to walk out. And then she walked out, and she was doing the sermon, and then she said, right, we're going to walk out now. And maybe a quarter of the people there, or many of the people in the church walked out and did this leaving the church. And she mentions this a bit in Beyond God the Father about what a profound experience it was, and that doing it together, walking out of the church once and for all, really changed things. It was a really profound moment. And so that's a good one. Okay, but let's see this. So I propose that another form of reversal. So she's using this term reversal that she uses a lot in her books afterwards, that one of the tricks and the tools of patriarchy is to reverse the stuff that is being done to us, they say is being done to them, and that we're very bad because we're mean to them. So I propose that another form of reversal has been the idea of redemptive incarnation, uniquely in the form of a male savior. For, as already indicated, this is precisely what is impossible. A patriarchal divinity, or his son, is exactly not in a position to save us from the horrors of a patriarchal world. Does this mean then that the women's movement points to and seeks, or in some way constitutes, a rival to the Christ? On another but related level, Michelet wrote that the priest has seen in the witch an enemy, a menacing rival. In its depth, because it contains a dynamic that drives beyond Christolatry, the women's movement does point to or seek and constitute the primordial, always present, and future Antichrist. It does this by breaking the great silence, raising up female pride, recovering female history, healing, and bringing into the open female presence. I suggest that the mechanism of reversal has been at the root of the idea that the Antichrist must be something evil. What if this is not the case at all? What if the idea has arisen out of males' unconscious dread that women will rise up and assert the power robbed from us? What if it in fact points to a mode of being and presence that is beyond patriarchy's definitions of good and evil? The Antichrist dreaded by patriarchs may be the surge of consciousness, the spiritual awakening that can bring us beyond Christolatry to a fuller stage of consciousness, conscious participation in the living God. So that might be one of the terms that she sort of rejects. She said she changed her language as time went on, this idea of the living God. She didn't seem to use that later, did she? She got rid of using, well, sort of trying to talk about spirituality as God, and or even as living God. So, but I mean, some of the stuff I really like about this bit about uh, that when they're talking about the Antichrist, the evil, badness, and the embodiment of a force of evil. What she's getting at is actually that's us. That's radical feminists. We're the evil, and the witches, of course, were evil, and that when they talk about it within Christianity, they're not so explicit, but it's sort of subliminally known that we are the evil, or those outside the remit, or who haven't submitted to the male God and his Son and his Holy Ghost. So we are the evil. So I think that's very, very good. And partly a good thing about, or I think a useful thing about her writing is she says that because Christianity was the dominant religion in the West, and the West has gone on to dominate the world, or went on to dominate the world in the last 2000 years, a lot of the structures of patriarchy are actually influenced by Christianity. And so it's replicated in a lot of different places, this idea of evil women, bad women. And so it's sort of useful for everybody in the world to understand how bad and how patriarchal Christianity has been, and how it's still sort of there in things like psychiatry and other new religions like transgender ideology.
She talks about the idea of a male savior, but in virtually all mythologies and many religions, there is almost an exact same story of the son of a greater being who comes to live among human beings and sacrifices himself to save them. I mean, that's a really common thing. It's in Norse mythology. It's in a lot of in some of the Hindu stories. It's very common. It's so pervasive in societies and cultures and time frames that had no connection with each other. I mean, the concept comes from somewhere, and we would say, I think she would say it's patriarchal. But if there is this good, then there also has to be this bad, the Antichrist for Christians, and whatever other evil entities are in the other cultures in their mythologies. So I think that's the idea that that happens and that it's so universal is a very spiritual thing, and makes me think that it comes from, yeah, it comes from patriarchy, but is there's some other defining characteristic or defining aspect of spirituality that makes everybody in the world and every culture think that that has happened, actually has happened, should happen, does happen, has happened.
Mm. I mean, she talks quite a lot in the book about the Christian stories about like it being Eve's fault, that Adam was just great, and then Eve was the evil and drew him into evil. And then she also talks a lot. I mean, so if you're interested in reading the book, she talks a lot about the Mary, Mother of God, and those that impossibility of Mary being a virgin before, during, and after giving birth to the Son of God, and that image of Mary, this sort of mother, and then Eve as the sinner, the person who took us all into sin. So that's those are both sort of really useful bits of analysis. I had a thing when I was 13. My mum went away on holiday, and she came back, and she said she always used to get us presents when she came back. So it's nice that she got presents. Said, I wanted to get you something. So I went around the whole shop, the whole tourist shop, and I could find nothing that would be appropriate for you until I found this, Joe. And it was a really, really nasty looking crocodile with horrible teeth and his little plaything. And she said, and I just knew immediately it reminded me so much of you that it would be perfect for you because it looks so evil. And at 13, I thought, this is not good. My mother saying she looked through the whole shop and the only thing she could find is something that looks very, very evil, which is just right for me because it reminded. And she actually, I don't think she totally just thought I was evil, but I think that probably came from her Christianity. And she had this sense of this budding radical feminist that on one sense, she knew that I was the evil, that, I was going to go on to be outside the church and be on the side of what they call evil. But it was absolutely shocking
Oh,
for me.
that's like actually putting coal in a kid's stocking. I mean, that is,
Yes,
that's abusive. Oh
but
my
it's
God.
even worse than coal, isn't it? It's like you are actually evil. I actually think you are evil.
Oh my
So,
God.
yeah, I think that helped me, drove me to try to find out
Don't go to therapy for that.
what on
Don't.
earth's happening that your own mother can think you're evil.
Oh my
Um,
God.
but obviously, I mean, the reading of Mary Daly explains all of that mothers are uh, commissioned under patriarchy to teach their daughters that their true selves are evil and that they need to conform and submit to Jesus. And the only way to get rid of that. That's very nice. Lucy's saying, how awful. I'm sorry, Joe. It's not your fault, Lucy.
Oh my God.
But it's very nice you're sorry. But anyway, I'm sure lots of us we've had a fantastic chat, and I haven't really been really able to read it, but this book has given, I mean, I'm going to read it afterwards. There's lots and lots of really interesting spin-off ideas and sparking of insights and thoughts and understandings going on in the chat, which is exactly what, if Mary Dale is listening, she will be delighted by what we're up to.
Yeah, Mary Daly can be very difficult to read. It's not something that I mean, it's not like a novel and it's not like a textbook. You read a section of it and then you like sort of like stop and go think for 5 weeks and then come back to it, having thought about stuff that you never thought about before. That's what she's like. She was not, I heard her speak once, twice. She
Oh,
was
wow.
not, yeah, not as sort of woo as she is in her books. She was a really good speaker. And I'm glad we uh I'm glad we have her works.
Yeah, and I mean, I suppose that the final thing I would say about the Mary Daly stuff is she says in some of her books, maybe Pure Lust or something, she says it's weird writing this because she says, reifying, thingifying, making things into a book, into a fixed format. But I don't think that things are the answer, that we can't get anywhere. Like this book, Pure Lust, is just a moment in time. But what really is sort of the thing what we should be doing is the doing thing, the doing a lot and being and going forwards and living. And I suppose that really is a big thing why I like us doing these webinars and doing Radfem Perspectives and FQ2 is we do a lot of it, and it's very there's a lot going on. There's far too much for us to read. I'll probably not be able, well, I'll try to, but read all the chat. We're actually busy being a sisterhood, a meta-patriarchal sisterhood in this. And we're not sort of thingifying. We're not saying, oh, there was one webinar 5 years ago, which is the webinar, which is the answer. It's us doing it, which is the answer. So I definitely feel that my understanding of what we are doing and what we're doing today is in the spirit of what I learned from her. So it's good. Right. Final thought, Marian.
You know, when I was a kid, I read the Chronicles of Narnia. Um, and and yes, basically it's like, how much more could C.S. Lewis say? I want you to see Christianity in this. But when I was like 5 years old, um, I thought that Aslan and the dryads and the trees and all that was just great. And if there had to be a religion, that's what I wanted. And if it was real, I don't know, I might I might still find aspects of it appealing.
Yeah. Well, that's really nice. And thank you so much for doing that. That's really been a massive pleasure. Thank you so much, everybody who's been here. It's been lovely. I'm going to read the chat later and see you either in the breakout rooms or next